Here's a request with lots of questions. The initial question is, what is the difference between direct and indirect painting? But then there are many other questions here, and finally this person asked, I need an explanation of direct painting in detail. Now some of the questions might be your questions too, how do you do direct painting when the paint is wet or wet and wet? Or how do you apply the paint? Do you need to clean your brush before applying another color onto the wet paint? Then how often do I need to clean my brush before applying paint? Do I press hard or light on the wet surface? How is the first layer of wet painting covering the second layer of wet paint? We have some other quick tips that are going to cover some of these questions. Quick tip 252, building a painting, check that out. Quick tip 271, expressive brush strokes, check that out. And check out other titles that have to do with these. I'm going to hone in on first the difference between indirect and direct painting, which seems to confuse lots of people. And then a short little demo on building a direct painting. The difference between direct and indirect painting. With indirect painting, if I were doing a painting of this scene, I would first of all do a drawing, then I would do an underpainting that's done in all values called a grisaille, and then I would begin to layer colors rather than mixing colors together. There is some mixing in indirect painting. I would begin to paint one layer. Usually the painters that work with their indirect painting work dark to light, and so I would start with the darkest darks, let that dry, lay another layer, let that dry, and so on. Now if you're painting in oils, that's going to take a long time. Sometimes these paintings can go over months depending on how large and how many layers it's going to take for the artist to do what needs to be done. If you're painting in acrylics, it can go much faster. Of course, if you're painting in watercolor, you don't consider, well, there is some glazing done in watercolor where colors can be applied, then it dries, and other colors laid on top, and so on like that. So don't want to confuse that. I think this person is probably referring to oils. And so the difference between direct painting and indirect painting then is what I just described to you as indirect painting. In direct painting, it's all done wet and wet, or most of it is done wet and wet, pretty much. Also called alla prima. Direct painting is usually considered painting that's done in one painting session, although that doesn't necessarily have to be. But most of the painting is done in a single session, so that's more direct. And the two can be mixed together. There can be a certain amount of painting that's done in one session, and that can dry, and then indirect or other layers added to it. So don't get confused too much about all this stuff. It doesn't separate itself into unique packages, but it can all blend together. But for sake of clarity for this person, let me just point out, or let me just show you a very brief approach to doing direct painting, because I want to answer those questions about the wet and the brush and all stuff like that. Now, I won't try to do this whole scene. We won't have time for that. We're just going to select a small portion there. And what I'll do first of all, usually when artists are doing direct painting, the first thing you need is a placement. And so when I say placement, I mean you're generally placing shapes where you want them to be. So I will just sort of do a little bit of a little format here for you. And let's just look at what the general shapes would be. Now, if I were just focusing in on this part, you see that all this is pretty much in shadow in here. So if I were just focusing in on that part, then what I might do then is to look not at the individual shapes and leaves and all like that, but the general light and shadow shapes. So what I might do there then is I might just kind of indicate here where the lighter portions of that shadow are. Just kind of indicate that sort of maybe like this just a little bit. and then where the darker portions of those shadows are. So it might come in sort of something like this, and then kind of curl down like that. Now, I might or might not indicate the placement of the tree. I could, or sometimes people would make an indication of the trunk of the tree, just to sort of get its placement started, something like that. But for a scene like that, that's probably enough to do if you're doing the alla prima approach. Now beyond that, some artists have a toned canvas. So they'll start out with a canvas that's toned in some color throughout. There are several approaches. There is no right approach. There are several approaches. So I'm just going to show you my approach. Now my approach is always to define the shadow area first. Well, if I'm working just in a shadow area, the entire area is in shadow. Now I want to stick to that because I want to show you something that people often fail to do with areas in shadow. And so what I would do then is I would generally block in generally, and we have this is kind of redundant because this approach is in other quick tips. All right, so very quickly then, I would first of all just squint and look for shadow area. Now the shadow area I have here is right in here, and so I just need to generally block that in. Now to one of the questions, block this in a thin layer, not meaning that you add solvent or a medium to it, but you just allow the paint itself to be in a thin layer. And that will enable you then to place other layers within it and on top of it. And so all I'll do in here is simply block this in. I'm looking right in here. So I'm going to block that in as just a general dark shape. Now that scares a lot of people because a lot of people think that you've got to outline and draw every single little thing that's within a shape. And they get, but the thing is that if you're looking at the value structure rather than the thing itself, and that's what you're responding to, you're going to have much more accurate painting than if you try to start out with detail and try to paint one little detail after the other from the beginning. That's going to get you in pretty bad trouble. So you see what I'm doing here? I'm simply blocking this in as a single value. And so I'll just start, and I'm not going to do, this is going to be what we might call a vignette. All right, so I will still kind of bring that down just a little bit here, give it a little bit of the motion of the brush of what we see down here, and sort of like that. Now there we go. Now I see a lighter value that's still in shadow, and so then I will move to that lighter value. Now here is a place where I answer one of this person's questions. Do I clean the brush when I move from one color to the other? If you're moving from one value of one color to another, it might not be necessary to clean the brush. All you might need to do is simply pull the paint out of the brush. Now, my tendency sometimes is what you just saw me do. If I'm moving from one value to the other and I'm aware that there's not much paint left in the brush, I will move on to the next color and simply load the brush. But being aware of how much paint is in the brush is very important. So you have to have lots of awareness in painting in order to keep control of it. But since I'm moving simply to a higher or a lighter value in the same color, it's not necessary to wash the brush. And so that answers that question. And you'll see me, I'll be doing a repeated thing, a repetition of that throughout. And so then here I will simply block in. Now can you tell that is a little bit lighter in value, not much, but a little bit lighter in value, just light enough in value to distinguish it in my eye between this darkest value area and the lighter. Now as I move over in here, I'm seeing that there's more light coming in, still in shadow, but there's more light coming in. So I'll move over and load the brush again with the next lightest value up, and you can see here it is right here. So I'm going right over there and just loading that in. Now what was another question? I think about applying the brush strokes. Well, the question was about applying one color on top of another. And so I would just take that on the most, and then I'm seeing very light value behind there. But I wanted to keep it pretty close to what's in the shadow areas. So I will just gradually, as I move over, gradually create that dark to lighter value, as you might call it underpainting, or you might call it just the block in. I like using the word block in because that describes that I'm just placing things right now. I'm not trying to define things. And so I would do something like that. And then I could keep moving over, and as long as I stay, if I'm defining shadow areas, as long as I stay within that shadow area in the values that I'm placing, then I'm good. That's what I have to keep an eye on there, is when I'm blocking in, am I working in a shadow area or in an area that's not in shadow? Now, roughly, very roughly, that would be the block in. And then this is the point where I would go to the next step, and that would address the next part, or one part of the question that this person asked. Here then we go and we begin to discern differences in values in the shadow areas. Now this is a place, if I wanted to add the tree, this is the place where I would decide to add the tree trunk. Now to do that, I might start, because the tree trunk is a different color, I would pick up this color, pull it down here, and then with my palette knife I will go over and pick up a little, in this case, alizarin crimson. I'm not defining colors here, it's a value principle that I'm addressing. And then that will discern the difference, and then I could kind of look at where is that tree located. Okay, and now you can see, because I switched colors, I'm in the same value area. I'm in a really good general value area there. And so I can then begin to kind of place where that tree trunk would live, and then how it moves up. But you notice I blocked in the general shadow area first. So when you have an area like this where you have everything in shadow, blocking in the general shadow area is a good idea to do first. Now this is different from the indirect painting, in that in the indirect painting you would simply be defining things. You would already have all those values defined in your original underpainting in the Grisaille. But in this, we place our definitions as we go. And so I need to skip a few places there. I won't go into trying to put all this in, since I want to keep this very general. But so something like that. Now begin to look for differences in value. Now here, when I change colors, this is where I'm going to rinse the brush. So you see there's some places where you can simply pull the excess color out of the brush when you're in the same value area, or you're moving from one value, from a value to just a value up or down. That usually works pretty well, but you're the judge of that according to what you discover in your own experience that a painting is doing. So here I would get all of that color out of the brush. This is where I wash. Now you notice in that first layer, I wasn't having to pay a lot of attention to the pressure I put on the brush to address another one of the questions. In this next layer, I do have to pay attention to that. Because this then, so this is still wet, and so I'm going to be getting some variations in value, but the pressure and the way I hold the brush is going to determine how I'm able to control that, and that was part of the question. We have other videos dealing with this. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the next value up, and what I'm going to look for in here are values that are some kind of contrast. So right in this area we have a value of contrast. We have a darker here, and we have a little lighter behind, and so on. So that's what I'm looking for here. Still not detailed, but I'm going to load the brush, and this time, rather than dig it in, this time I'm going to hold it at a slight angle and just simply pull. Need that little bit lighter so I can see the contrast. Perhaps you can see it better than I can. And simply, now this is where I'll begin to sort of define brush strokes. How much contrast is there? Alright, you can see, now if I see a little bit of light popping out, I can lay that light. You see I'm giving it a light touch with the back part of the belly of the brush, and you see when I do that, this is This is a kind of scumble. When I do that, if I don't dig into it and keep stroking it, then it stays there. All right, so I'm not going to be, as I said before, my purpose here is not to build a painting for you. If you want to see a complete painting done, go watch No 10 How and Why. It's the only place where I actually do a complete painting, just to show you how that works. But my purpose is not to show you how to do a complete painting. It's to answer your questions. All right, so that here, and that shows you what I was talking about there. I need a little follow through over here. The light's continuing to shine on this side, so I'll go over here, and just by stroking gently, by stroking on top of that paint, I can put this lighter layer of paint on there without it digging in. So we could continue that process and go right up in here with the light, see, and now we begin to get those variations in value that we see back here. And we can continue building. As I said before, I'm not going to do the whole thing. We'll continue to build. Over here we see a little bit more light coming through. So we build here a little bit lighter than we see the block hen work that we just did, and so on. So you can kind of see how that goes. And then of course we would move into the tree and we do the same thing. And then if I were to move into the tree and catch that same kind of thing, then there's where I would wash and dry. Be sure the brush is totally dry, because if you have solvent left in the brush, you're going to lose control. It's going to make the paint too wet. So just a little bit there. I'd go right in here now. I need to pull just a tiny bit of white over here and get this just a little bit lighter. Not much. It's not that much lighter in the photo itself. It's just a little bit lighter. And let's see now. So I can just pick up that, and maybe a little bit, no, I might have just a little bit too light and a little too red. So control the value. Now, then where I see the light reflecting on that tree, see, I can just simply hold the brush and pull the stroke down like that, and then I can build the light. I can continue the painting in that fashion by, if I want the colors to mix. Give you that example. I think that question was asked. Suppose I want to blend this area. Suppose I don't want there to be a value difference right there. Suppose I just want to blend this area right here. Well, then I would take the brush and I'd pull those colors together like that and get a blend, or a gradation is a better way to call it. And I would continue to get more and more detail. Now, when I reach to this point, I begin to look within those areas again. Is there something in here that's lighter than what I have? And I can move on over, and then I begin to use a different area of the brush. Or you could change to a smaller brush, but there's a little light right here. I see a little light right there. So I just pick up a little light there and add it in. So you see, if you control the brush, if you control when you wipe it out or when you wash it out, and control how wet it is, then you can actually build wet in wet. And if you continue, and I could, but it will take too much time. I've shown you what you ask. If I continue, I can build a complete painting right here, wet in wet. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianeMize.com, where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.